Welcome to A2A Conversations, an ongoing discussion about turning adversity into advocacy. Join us as we explore the power of purpose, service, and empathy, and the resilience we build when helping ourselves by helping others. Now here's our host, A2A founder, Jeff Bell.
Hi there, and thanks as always for joining us. My guest today is a very special guy. His name is David Flink, and he's a longtime A2A advocate and a leading figure in the learning rights movement. David was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD at a young age and went on to found A2I, a nonprofit aiming to unlock greatness in the 1 in 5 who learn differently. He's the author of Thinking Differently, an inspiring guide for parents of children with learning disabilities. And as you're about to hear, his groundbreaking work is certainly attracting a lot of attention. So, David, a lot has changed, a lot has happened in your life since you and I last had a chance to share your story, including your being named a 2021 Top 10 CNN Hero. And I want to talk about that because that is no small thing, my friend. But first, for folks who are not familiar with your story, let's walk it back to the beginning, your childhood. You grew up with dyslexia and ADHD. At what point were you officially diagnosed with those challenges?
So I was in 5th grade, and I often think about actually how lucky I was to learn that I had dyslexia and ADHD because I struggled a ton in school. And if you would ask any of my teachers or any of my peers, what they thought about Dave, they would have said maybe kindly, maybe not so kindly, like, this is the kid who doesn't know how to read, doesn't know how to spell, doesn't know how to sit still in class, causes all kinds of trouble. So I thought I was the bad kid or maybe the dumb kid. And then I got these labels that explained my experience and told me, oh, it's just my environment hasn't been working for me. So it was actually quite a gift in 5th grade to learn that I was a part of this community that's really large. I didn't know that either. 20% of our population learns and thinks differently. So it was a godsend.
Did you find support in those early years once you had the correct diagnoses?
I mean, it was a journey, and I'm sure anybody who is listening, regardless of where they are on their own life journey, knows rarely is it kind of like, boom, it got fixed. This problem got fixed. And the problem, first off, wasn't centered in me. And I think I had internalized that somehow I was a bad or dumb kid. So I had to first work through that to learn, there's just different ways to approach learning. And with a lot of fortune, I was able to, with years, we're talking about years passing, I learned that by changing my environment, I could succeed. So little things. I had been taught to read through a method called whole language, which does not work well for people who are dyslexic. And then I was in 5th grade, literally not reading. And by the end of, maybe 7th grade, I was taught to read through a multisensory approach using phonics. And I'm still an awful reader. Dyslexia doesn't go away, but I could take up the words on the page for the first time in my life. And that's a big win. And then I learned, I can listen to books. That's acceptable too. And then I really took off. So, little things that made a big difference. I went from being the bad and dumb kid to being a kid who thought of himself as smart.
At what point did you decide I want to share my story and why?
Jeff, I don't think I was confident in sharing my story until college. And I think that while we're talking about the, late 80s and early 90s, there's a lot of stigma attached to, I'm using the words dyslexia and ADHD because those are the labels given to me. Now, I think younger people would describe it as neurodiversity, which is a much more empowering phrase, I think. But, it was in a whisper. I found out about these labels and it was like alone in a whisper, like I wasn't supposed to talk about it. And frankly, it wasn't until I went to college. And thankfully, the joke is I asked my roommate to proofread my paper, not telling him I was dyslexic. And he proofread it and gave it back to me. And when I got my paper back, there were still all kinds of spelling errors. And I went to him and I was like, hey, man, like, I thought you were going to proofread my paper. And I hadn't told him I was dyslexic. So he didn't probably know some of the things he needed to catch. But then he started laughing because he too was dyslexic. And I realized then I had never told my story, right? If I had started with why and telling my story, he might have told his. And in fact, the two of us shared in the moment of, oh, we can talk about this. And so it wasn't until I was 18 where I started telling my story and meeting other people who are willing to do the same.
And what was it like to start putting that out there? I mean, that's a big wall to climb for a lot of people, is to actually be that vulnerable and honest with others.
I didn't realize that I was carrying this weight the whole time,
Mm.
trying to hide the fact that there was a thing I did differently. The ADHD is a really good example because, so much, even to this day, about the way that I process information, it's just fundamentally different than others. And so, if I can just lead with it, it sort of explains my experience, even if the person I'm talking to maybe has never even thought about what it means to be somebody with ADHD. But as I started talking about it, it also gave me the space to try and give metaphors. So just to give you an example, I just came back from a talk in Las Vegas, and there's about 4,000 teachers there. And I started my talk because we were in Las Vegas. I was like, how can I give a metaphor to these teachers, some of whom might be neurodiverse, others not, but I wanted to give them a metaphor to understand how I experienced the world. So I went from telling no one to standing on a stage with 4,000 people. And here's what I said. It's great to be in Las Vegas, a place where everybody experiences the world the same way I do when I'm not in Las Vegas, because you walk around Las Vegas and there's so many invitations of things to do. Should I go see David Copperfield? Should I go try the pool? Should I go to the craps table? And when I walk around the world, it's the same thing, but it's like, oh, there's a squirrel. Oh, I should do my laundry. It's like everything is the same level of attention as you feel when you're walking through a casino in Las Vegas. And that was something I never would have said in the past, both as a way to explain my experience, but also to give, anybody permission to ask questions. Well, the same way I wanted to ask questions about their life.
Yeah, I think that's part of your gift, having gotten to know you over the years, David, is you really do have a unique talent in your ability to help frame what you're going through so other people better understand it. And that's a big part of advocacy.
It is. It's a big part of the work we're doing together, right, Jeff? To be able to give people permission to take that little risk. And it might feel like a huge risk, but it's a step to say, here's my story, and I'd love to learn yours. You need to really do both. I think you need to be willing to share your story and also have a curiosity or interest in other people's story, because we all have a unique story.
At what point in your journey, after sharing your story in smaller circles, did you decide to get A2A going?
So the story about the roommate was also kind of the inception of A2A in a sense, because I asked my roommate, his name was also Dave. I said, why didn't we tell each other, like, new roommate, perfect situation to lay out a couple of things, right? You meet a new roommate, and typically for anyone who's ever had a roommate, you say, well, I'm a morning person, and oh, I like to go running, and why wouldn't I have included dyslexia? And we were both like, well, because we just both had this similar experience of no one giving us a model on how to do it. And so the two of us recruited other people who were willing to tell their story. And we found them by wearing things like T-shirts on campus that said like dyslexic and proud or ADHD on our sleeve. And then we went to hang out with little kids, and A2A's beginning was around mentoring. So we, as kind of cool high school, college age kids, you're kind of innately cool in the eyes of a middle school kid. Yeah. I've learned that over the years. Going and telling these kids our story gave them permission to tell us their story. And so the hope is that generation never went through the trauma that we did, because we normalized their story as something that's a part of their identity. So it went from being this diagnosis and this label and this really heavy thing we were all carrying to just being a part of our identity the way that any other part of our identity can be celebrated.
Could you have ever imagined back then in college that this little thing that you were putting together called A2A would grow into this international organization that it is today?
Did I ever imagine it? No. I did imagine that I could make a difference in the world. And that's something that I always believed. I think it was reinforced by my family that actually I had a responsibility to leave this world better than I found it. And I didn't know that that commitment would lead me to helping, and I really mean helping, create an organization. I happened to be on the ground floor, but I was just in the right place at the right time.
So when you look back now at all the great successes over the years, well, what stands out to you? What have you found most rewarding about this work?
For me, it's always been about community. I remembered stepping into room for Maureen Kenner's room, who was the first teacher that ever let me be a mentor to one of her students. And that being such a profound experience, and that my mentee gave me something. But then to see a number of years later, not so much that student went on to college. Obviously, I was excited to see that happen, but he came back and mentored in the exact same classroom that I had mentored him. And in many ways, he was more authentic as a mentor than I was, because he could not only say, hey, you should tell your story and you should be proud of how you learn and you're bound for greatness. He could literally say, and I've been sitting in that seat. I sat right there where you're sitting. And that for me was probably one of the biggest moments. And I was lucky to have it happen early on, to believe that what we're building at A2A is truly a movement. I think a movement is articulated when a person makes a value a part of their life calling. And so to see that happen now, that was many, many years ago. To see this happen on a national, international scale, it feels really hopeful, because our work isn't done. So while I'm proud of what we've done, there's so much more to do.
You mentioned the mentor program, which is such a big part of what you do with A2A. And I love the overlap with the A2A model, which is that we help ourselves by helping others. So obviously your mentors have helped their mentees do a lot over the years. But what do you hear from the mentors about what they're getting out of your work?
I think, well, when the mentees become mentors, I think it's different, because I think they're like, we know you told us that we're going to be rock stars, and here we are doing great things in the world. But I think for the folks who are taking that first risk and maybe challenging a belief that they had, that they felt less than, and to see these young people not only tell them, oh, thank goodness you're here, you're uniquely positioned to be a mentor to me, but that you're also awesome. I mean, I honestly think the mentors get a lot from the mentee experience. I think now over the generations, what I'm excited to see is, as some of the students have come through our program and thankfully not experienced some of the traumatic, challenging hurdles that I know I did, because we've been there to smooth the road, they have an even wider aperture on their appetite for how they hope to change the world. So, I mean, I'm thinking about, we have school principals now that were former mentees and mentors in our work. We have leaders in various industries, same. And I think for them, it doesn't take a pandemic to realize that those furthest from opportunity were those hurt the most. And I think that's always sadly been the case for folks with invisible disabilities and invisible barriers that have been thrown up in front of them. So, I think there's an opportunity in the years ahead to just really unleash the limitless potential of the neurodiverse community.
All right, David, I have to ask you now about the CNN Hero Awards. You were named a top 10 finalist. I got to watch you, as did millions of other Americans across the country, on national television, sharing your story, sharing a little bit about A2A. What was that like?
So I walked into that experience knowing that the story was more about me than I typically like. I've always felt that A2A should be about this sort of shield for kids. And it's a shield that says all kids deserve to get equal shot in their schooling, regardless of how they learn best. And so suddenly the story was about A2A, and it highlighted our students, which I really appreciated. But I thought, okay, I'm going to be on the stage with Anderson Cooper and Kelly Ripa and all these other celebrities.
You look good up there, by the way.
I did have some help on the suit selection and tie, so thank you. And so the main thing I did is I wanted to choose my words very carefully. I wanted to make sure that I was getting up there, noting my privilege, both my own privilege as a white man with neurodiversity, knowing that, the intersectionality of neurodiversity is what I love about neurodiversity, but I do not represent everybody's experience. And so, sort of getting there knowing that I had only my story to tell, and I needed to try and represent a diversity of stories. And then the privilege of, I was the one invited. So I don't want to say I couldn't mess it up, because that's too much pressure. And I don't think that that's what the community was asking of me. But I wanted to make our community proud.
Well, it was so cool to see you up there on that national platform doing what you do. David, before we wrap things up, and actually this is a great place to wrap things up, I want to ask you to speak to somebody out there who is inspired by your story, inspired by this kind of advocacy, but thinking to himself or herself, I can't do that. I'm just one person. Clearly, you are just one person that started a project in college that has taken you to this national platform on CNN and elsewhere around the world. Speak to that person who might have some insecurities around stepping into advocacy.
I got these letters from the CNN experience, and I'll just cite one of them because I think it speaks to what you're describing. Actually, I'll tell you about two letters because I think there's two types of people listening. One was the letter from a kid who wrote about how much he appreciated validating the story of his brother. And I mentioned that one first because whether you're somebody who needs to, be an advocate for yourself or for others because of an experience you've had, or whether you're an ally, they both matter. So I mentioned that one because anybody has the opportunity to make a difference. And so he chose to write me a letter to say that this CNN moment gave him strength to be an ally to his brother.
I love
and
that.
Then, so many other young people who choose to write me. I think writing me was a safe beginning because it was just coming to me. But they put their pen on a piece of paper, and what happened is that they made their story real. And so if the question is really like, what can I possibly do to make a difference? Anything. I mean, telling your story is a sacred thing. Standing up for others is a courageous, brave thing. Doing nothing is a thing that I implore you not to do. If you have a story, tell it. If you see a wrong, fix it. There is no way in which the world won't be better if you take those steps.
Well, you, my friend, are certainly making the world a better place every time you open your mouth and share your story and all the great work that you're doing. Thanks for making some time. It's so great to catch up, David.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. The work that you do and A2A does is near and dear to my heart, as you know. I am honored to be in this moment with you and also on this journey at the work ahead with everybody who's tuning in today.
You've been watching A2A Conversations, a presentation of the nonprofit A2A Alliance. Guest views and opinions expressed in this production are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of A2A, its advocates, advisors, or partners. To watch more of our A2A Conversations, please visit us online at a2aalliance.org.